The wind blew hot across the golden dunes, carrying the sweet scent of myrrh and the mystery of faraway lands. Back then, before empires erected monuments to eternity, there was a thriving kingdom nestled between mountains and deserts, where trade was king, and wisdom was an even more valuable treasure than gold. SHEBA, a name that echoed among merchants and travelers like an enchanted whisper, a land of unimaginable riches and stories that bordered on the divine. In that kingdom, they didn't talk about battles won with swords, but about victories achieved through intelligence and strategy. The caravans that cut through the desert brought spices, fine fabrics, precious stones, and secrets whispered in the shadows of tents. And among those secrets, a truth was gaining strength. A woman ruled SHEBA. She wasn't just any queen. Her gaze was as steady as the mountains that surrounded her land, and her mind as sharp as the blades of the daggers that guarded her throne. Her name? Some called her Makeda. Others simply knew her as the Queen of SHEBA. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. But who was this woman who commanded a kingdom where the world seemed to bow before its greatness? It was said that her intelligence surpassed even the oldest sages of her land. From childhood, she showed an unusual understanding of the mysteries of life, a vision that went beyond the horizon. She inherited not only a throne, but a legacy, and she knew that her name wouldn't be lost in the dust of time. Nights in SHEBA were silent, but never empty. In the dark, amidst the flames of the lamps, the queen listened to the tales of travelers. That's how one night she heard about a man, a king, someone who, they said, possessed unparalleled wisdom, capable of answering any question and deciphering any riddle. His name? Solomon. Solomon's name echoed in the queen's thoughts long after the last traveler had left, leaving behind only the scent of burning incense and the promise of a new dawn. But before destiny led her to him, before the sands of the desert witnessed her great journey, there was a time when she was neither queen, nor legend, nor enigma. There was a time when she was just a girl amidst the splendor of SHEBA, growing up in the shadows of palaces and the murmurs of the elders. From a young age, Makeda was different. She wasn't content just learning the rules of protocol or the delicate gestures of a princess. Her curious eyes scanned the scribe's scrolls. Her attentive ears captured conversations that escaped even the most discreet advisors. She wanted to understand the mysteries of the world and not just accept them. Even as a child, she surprised the priests with questions that demanded deeper answers than simple traditions could offer. They said her spirit was as restless as the winds that blew from the mountains, and there was something about her that made wise men hesitate before giving her an empty answer. But fate doesn't grant power without a price. Her father, the king, knew that ruling SHEBA wasn't a privilege, but a burden. A throne wasn't just made of gold, but of difficult choices, of sacrifices, and sometimes of loneliness. Makeda learned this early, perhaps too early. With the king's death, all eyes turned to her. Some doubted, others feared. A woman on the throne. SHEBA was rich, powerful, coveted. Many would try to overthrow her before she could even prove her strength. But Makeda didn't back down. The blood of the ancient kings ran in her veins, and she wouldn't let her name be lost like sand carried by the wind. So the moment arrived. The day the girl would become queen, but assuming the crown was just the beginning. The coronation took place at sunrise, when the golden light touched the towers of the palace and made the new queen's jewels shine like stars. Makeda, sitting on the throne of her ancestors, showed no fear, but in her heart she knew that that day marked the beginning of something much bigger than herself. Being queen didn't just mean wearing a crown or sitting on gold-embroidered cushions. It meant ruling. It meant facing those who underestimated her, those who in silence plotted to overthrow her. She realized early on that the throne was a battlefield, but her weapon wouldn't be brute force. No, Makeda would fight with intelligence. She observed everything, listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, her words were precise, sharp as blades hidden under a silk veil. The great merchants, who had previously hesitated to entrust their businesses to a woman, soon realized that challenging her would be foolish. The generals, who questioned her ability to protect SHEBA, found in her a strategist who saw beyond the obvious. But there was one thing that not even her cunning could avoid: the isolation of power. During the sumptuous banquets and meetings with advisors, Makeda felt the invisible weight of loneliness. The throne was high, and the higher it was, the colder it became. At night, when the palace plunged into silence, she wondered if destiny really belonged to those who chose it, or if everyone was just a piece in a much bigger game. It was on one of those nights, surrounded by maps, scrolls, and reports on the riches of her kingdom, that a story reached her. The same one she had heard years before, but which now returned with more force. The king of a distant people, famous for his wisdom, ruled with justice and discernment. His name echoed along the trade routes, mixing with the scent of spices. Solomon, the one who knew all the answers. Solomon's name began to haunt her thoughts like a melody that refused to be forgotten. Everywhere she looked, everywhere she listened, stories about him were there. They said he understood the secrets of nature, that he talked to animals, and mastered the art of riddles. His kingdom, Israel, flourished not only with riches, but with a wisdom that attracted kings and rulers from distant lands. Makeda wasn't a woman who was easily impressed. She had heard many stories throughout her life, some true, others embellished by the exaggeration of merchants who liked to make their accounts more valuable than their goods. But something about that story bothered her. What made a man so wise? What did he know that others didn't? The caravans that crossed the desert brought witnesses to his greatness. Men who had set foot in Jerusalem told of his magnificent temple, his just laws, his decisions that seemed to come directly from the heavens. But Makeda wasn't one to believe only what she heard. Words could be deceptive, stories could be shaped like clay in the hands of a potter. That's when an idea formed in her mind. If Solomon was really that wise, if his understanding was so profound, then he should be tested. Makeda didn't just want to hear about his intelligence, she wanted to see it in action. She decided right then and there that she would travel to Jerusalem. But this wouldn't be an ordinary visit. It wouldn't be a simple exchange of gifts between monarchs. She wanted answers. She wanted to challenge the king's mind with questions that had never been asked. And if he really was who they said he was, he would know how to answer them. Thus began the preparation for a journey that would go down in history. The decision was made. Makeda would depart for Jerusalem. But a queen doesn't travel alone, much less in a simple manner. If she was going to Solomon, she would do it as a sovereign, as the woman who ruled SHEBA with the same firmness that the sun dominated the sky. And more than that, she would make her arrival remembered for generations. Preparations began even before the first ray of sun touched the walls of the palace. Caravans were organized, routes were traced, secrets were discussed in torch-lit meetings. It wouldn't be an easy crossing. The desert was treacherous, sandstorms unpredictable, and thieves always lurking. But Makeda wasn't made of fear. She knew the dangers, yes, but she also knew that the greatest challenges often hold the most valuable treasures. She ordered them to load the finest gifts that SHEBA could offer: gold in abundance, precious stones cut like stars, rare perfumes that perfumed the air as if they were fragments of paradise itself. But these were just ornaments. The real gift lay in what Makeda planned to take with her: riddles, questions that would challenge even the sharpest mind, mysteries that not even the elders of her land had been able to solve. If Solomon was, in fact, the wisest man in the world, he should prove it. The journey began before dawn. Camels loaded to the limits of resistance, warriors attentive to any strange movement on the horizon. The nights were cold, the days scorching, Every mile traveled was a promise of what was to come. And as Jerusalem approached, Makeda wondered, what kind of man would Solomon be? A king shrouded in legends, or in fact someone worthy of his fame? She would soon find out, and so would he. The gates of Jerusalem opened for the SHEBA retinue as if destiny itself had summoned them. A buzz swept the streets. People elbowed their way to get a look at the woman whose legend had crossed deserts and seas. The fine fabrics covering the camels shimmered in the sun, and the scent of spices brought from her land filled the air. Never before had an entrance been so grand, and that was exactly what Makeda wanted. If she was going to test a king, let him know that the woman before him was no ordinary visitor. In the palace, Solomon awaited her. Seated on his throne of ivory and gold, the king observed everything with a calm but insightful gaze. When the queen entered the hall, a subtle silence spread. For an instant, time seemed to hesitate. It wasn't just her beauty that drew attention, although her presence had a magnetism impossible to ignore. It was something more. An air of mystery, an unspoken challenge. Makeda didn't bow. She wasn't a subject before a king, but a sovereign before another. And Solomon, instead of being offended, smiled. There was recognition there. A game was beginning, even though neither of them had spoken a single word. Servants brought goblets of wine and trays of fruit. The king received her with hospitality, as tradition dictated. But he knew, and so did she, that this wasn't a simple diplomatic visit. Then the queen, who had come from so far, leaned slightly forward, resting her elbows on the table, her eyes shining with a hidden fire. "They say you know all the secrets of the world." Her voice sounded with a touch of irony and curiosity. "Let's see if that's true." And so began the true encounter between the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. Solomon set the goblet down on the table, unhurried, with no sign of unease. His eyes, as sharp as a hawk's, met Makeda's with a silent curiosity. He had received kings and rulers from all corners of the earth, but something about this woman was different. She hadn't come in search of alliances, nor of gold, nor to bend her knee before his wisdom. She had come to test him. Makeda tilted her head slightly, the glint in her eyes betraying the pleasure of the challenge. "If you are the wisest man on earth, then there is no riddle that you cannot decipher." The words left her lips like a provocation wrapped in silk. The hall filled with stifled murmurs. Solomon's advisors, accustomed to seeing him answer everything without hesitation, watched attentively. She began with questions about the world, the stars that embroidered the sky, the winds that guided the ships, the secrets hidden beneath the deep waters. Solomon answered effortlessly, as if reading the answers in the shadows that danced around the torches. But Makeda didn't give up. Her questions became more complex, mixing logic with mystery, involving paradoxes and traps of reasoning. Then came the question that made the hall hold its breath. "What is the strongest thing in the world?" Solomon, for the first time, took an extra moment. His fingers slid along the arm of the throne, his gaze lost in the void for a brief moment, and then he smiled. "Desire," he said, "because neither kings nor warriors can resist it." Makeda held his gaze. For the first time, she felt that she might have found someone her equal. The night progressed, and the conversation flowed like a river, with no hurry to reach the sea. But between the words and the riddles, there was something else hovering in the air, something that not even the wisest of minds could predict. The night stretched like a cloak of dark velvet over Jerusalem. In the great hall of the palace, the servants had already withdrawn discreetly, and the torches burned with lower flames, casting elongated shadows on the gilded walls. But neither Makeda nor Solomon seemed to notice the passage of time. The game of words and challenges had given way to something more subtle, more dangerous. Makeda set the goblet of wine before her, her fingers drawing slow circles on the rim. She didn't usually get impressed easily, but something about Solomon disarmed her in a way she didn't expect. It wasn't just intelligence, it was the way he listened, how he seemed to see beyond the words. as if he could see what hid behind the silences. Solomon, in turn, watched her with a rare interest. He knew well the power of enchantment and palace intrigues. He had already faced leaders who tried to bend him with flattery or veiled threats. But this woman, she was different. She sought nothing but the truth, and the more he spoke with her, the more he realized that her wisdom didn't come only from books or the experience of the elders, but from something deeper. "Sheba is a rich but distant kingdom," he said, leaning back in his throne. "What would make a queen cross deserts to find a king?" Makeda smiled wryly, her eyes shining in the light of the nearest lamp. "I wanted to see with my own eyes if your fame was just," she replied, pausing for a moment before completing. "And because there are certain answers that no advisor can give." Solomon's eyes narrowed slightly, as if catching something hidden in those words. A cool breeze entered through the large open windows, stirring the veils that covered the columns. The silence between the two carried an invisible weight. A different challenge now hung in the air, one that couldn't be solved with logic or riddles. And the night, long and full of mysteries, wasn't over yet. The first ray of sun touched the towers of the palace, tinting Jerusalem with golden and rosy tones. The world outside was slowly awakening, but within the walls of the great hall, time seemed to have followed its own rhythm. The conversation between Makeda and Solomon had extended far beyond what either of them had planned. They were no longer just riddles, challenges, or tests of intelligence. Something deeper was forming there, something that couldn't be named with simple words. Makeda, sitting before the table still filled with untouched goblets and forgotten fruits, watched Solomon with an indecipherable look. During the night, she had heard him speak about the world, about justice, about the power to govern, and the uncertainties that came with it. But in the moments when the conversation flowed effortlessly, in the moments when formality dissolved, she noticed something that few probably noticed: the invisible weight that Solomon carried. Because being a king wasn't just a gift, it was also a burden, and no one understood that better than she did. "What worries you, great king?" Her voice broke the silence of the morning, soft but firm. Solomon looked up, as if returning from a distant thought. For an instant, Makeda saw a shadow of weariness pass over his eyes, but it was something so brief that it might have just been a trick of the light. "The same thing that worries any ruler who understands his own power," he said with a half-smile. "Knowing that as much as we try, we will never have all the answers." Makeda held his gaze for a moment, as if keeping those words in a safe place inside herself. The journey to Jerusalem had begun as a test, but now something more was forming. And when she returned to Sheba, she would take with her much more than she had planned. The sun was already high when Makeda left the gates of Solomon's palace. The sound of the camels' hooves echoed through the streets of Jerusalem as her entourage organized for the long journey back to Sheba. But something in her had changed. She had arrived as a queen, determined to test a king, but now she was leaving carrying something much more valuable than answers. During the days she spent alongside Solomon, she saw with her own eyes what it was to rule with wisdom. She felt the weight of the loneliness that power imposes. She recognized in him reflections of her own soul. Between riddles and conversations that spanned the nights, they shared more than knowledge. They shared the truth of being leaders, of carrying kingdoms on their shoulders, and yet remaining human. The streets were full of onlookers who wanted to see the queen leave, as if they didn't believe she was really there, that a woman from such distant lands had challenged and enchanted the wisest king in the world. But what no one knew was that the story didn't end there. There was something that only she and Solomon knew, something that couldn't be carried in boxes of gold or bottles of rare perfumes. Makeda took with her not only memories, but a secret that grew within her with each step of her journey back. They say that, upon returning to Sheba, she gave birth to a son, an heir who carried within him the wisdom of a king and the spirit of a queen. His name would be remembered for generations, and from him would be born a lineage that would change the destiny of a people. But what Makeda left in Jerusalem was as profound as what she took with her. Because some stories don't end with a goodbye, but continue to echo through time, leaving lessons that never fade. Years passed, but the story of the Queen of Sheba never faded. Her name crossed deserts, crossed oceans, mingled with the traditions of different peoples. Some called her Makeda, others just the Great Queen. But regardless of how she was remembered, what she represented was undeniable. A woman who wasn't content with what she was told, who sought the truth with her own feet, who challenged the logic of the wisest men and found something that not even intelligence can explain. She returned to Sheba not only as a queen, but as a transformed woman. Her kingdom prospered even more, ruled by someone who learned that true power is not in gold or strength, but in the ability to see beyond what the eyes can see. They say that she taught her people the secrets she had brought with her, spreading a knowledge that couldn't be measured in riches, but was worth more than any treasure. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of her story. Makeda taught us that wisdom is not something one simply possesses, it's something one seeks. It's the courage to ask questions, the humility to listen to the answers, and the daring to follow paths that no one has walked before. She showed us that power, when guided by intelligence and truth, can build empires, but that true greatness comes from within, from a spirit that doesn't fear the unknown. And so, her legend remained, not just as the queen who crossed the desert to challenge a king, but as the one who understood that some questions don't need immediate answers. Sometimes, the simple act of asking is enough to change a life or an entire kingdom. If you enjoyed the story of the Queen of Sheba and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.